Communicating Astronomy with the Public Commission C2. Oana, thank you so much for joining us today. And please join us in giving a big welcome to all the participants.
Certainly. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to share with you some thoughts today. I have recently become a mother, and as all mothers present here today know very well, being a mother teaches you so many things and empowers you with incredibly useful things, not just in relation to your child, but also in relation to yourself and for your professional life. So here I was reading about raising children, going from one thing to another. I came across an idea I found interesting for the CAP community. A psychotherapist was discussing how alienation is the main issue of today's society. He was saying our current culture makes us become alienated from four things: ourselves, work, others, and nature. Thinking of today's challenges, climate change, discrimination, racism, false facts, social media deviation, and even the pandemic, just to name a few, I could see his point. But think about these four areas: ourselves, work, others, and nature. Aren't we, the astronomy and space community, in such a privileged position to address almost all of them, if not all? When some of you researchers out there discover new worlds, and some of you press officers communicate about them, and you journalists report on them, aren't we all providing an opportunity to people to ponder on our place in the universe and to reflect on the human nature? When some of you amateur astronomers show the stars around which new worlds were discovered to people on the streets, and some of you planetarium people teach the constellations where these stars are to visitors, don't they all get a feeling that we are all living under one sky? When some of you working for satellites show us images of our Earth, don't we all realize we're on a tiny blue dot, the only one we have so far? When some of you educators, visual artists and designers, developers and the like produce material explaining the universe, aren't we all left in awe of nature and how everything works? Finally, some of you I have the honor to meet. Whenever I do, regardless of your role, you always come across as passionate and enthusiastic. And it seems to me that as a community, we are very connected to the work we do, and we feel we serve a higher purpose. I think we can all agree that in science's quest to understand the universe, we will accomplish something even better. We will feel less alien here on Earth in relation to ourselves, others, and nature. What a privilege and what a responsibility lies in our hands, to be in a position where we can contribute to changing the world for the better. With this thought in mind, I wish you an inspiring conference thanks to the people you will meet here. For this edition, CAP volunteers have worked around the clock and members of the community have stepped up when we faced challenge after challenge as we organized our first ever virtual conference and a record-breaking one. This conference is a community-based initiative, as mentioned before, and I also want to thank you all for making this a safe and supporting environment as we gather here to meet our peers and learn from them. Thank you and enjoy CAP.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your words and also to providing some context for the upcoming days in terms of the discussions that we will have with the rest of the community. So our next speaker is Lina Canas, also co-chair of the Working Group for Communicating Astronomy with the Public Conference, and also the director of the IAU Office of Astronomy for Astronomy Outreach, based in Tokyo, Japan. Welcome, Lina.
Thank you, Pedro. As you mentioned, my name is Lina Canas, and after the beautiful speech from Oana, my role is to thank or take this opportunity to express once again our gratitude to the Kavli Foundation, as this conference could not be possible without their generous support and their sponsorship. We want to thank our colleagues from our sister office, the IAU Office of Astronomy for Education, to our national outreach coordinators, our IAU Commission C2 members that were deeply committed to supporting the organization and also the dissemination of the CAP conference. And of course, all our colleagues globally that volunteered to dedicate their time and their efforts to aid in the huge, enormous logistics behind the conference. We are here today thanks to them. And it's been quite a journey to be able to share this moment in time and space, virtually, of course, together. So many time zones, so many diverse backgrounds, different personal contexts. But all of us, united by our excitement for science, our love for astronomy, our commitment to bring astronomy to all, and to engage our communities through astronomy. This CAP conference is an extraordinary edition for us at the OAO. We have seen it build up together as a community. In many ways, through this adverse period that we are still facing, we have grown together. We have strengthened our ties, not only locally, but internationally, finding and giving support in a time of need. In the past year, we were humbled to see so many of your inspirational examples on outreach, on communication, public engagement, and even at a distance. We were one email, one text, one e-meeting away. And even in isolation and confinement, we were never truly alone. So we were amazed how you stayed connected, using scientific outreach to maintain your community safe and keeping them active and engaged through and with astronomy. This is therefore a very special edition of COP, where we will hear all of your inspired examples come together and the chance to exchange your experience and ideas. We at the OAO are fortunate already to be sharing so much of your path with so many of you already, and we are most looking forward to connecting with you that we have not yet met. So thank you all and welcome.
Thank you so much, Lina. And I guess on behalf of the rest of the Scientific Organizing Committee, but I'm also sure on behalf of all the participants, I'd like to acknowledge the huge efforts of Ram, Owen, and Lina for making this conference possible. And not only from the incredible content to the complex logistics that they were involved. So without further ado, I would like to jump directly into the content and start with our talks. So we're going to start with a plenary session, and our CAP 2021 Kavli keynote speaker is Dr. John Besley. Dr. Besley is based at Michigan State University, United States of America. John studies public opinion about science and scientists' opinions about the public. And he wants to understand how views about decision makers and decision processes affect perceptions of science and technology. Dr. Besley focused on the context of trying to help science communicators to be more strategic. And it was because of this that Dr. Besley joined us very recently as a member of the steering committee of the IAU Kavli Public Engagement Training Program. Today, John is going to talk about communication strategies for scientists and science communicators. John, thank you so much for joining us and also for joining our community today. And I guess I'm going to let you start. The microphone is yours. And once again, excellent. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pedro. I really appreciate it. I'm really honored to be able to be with you guys. Just want to check my audio is okay?
Sounds good.
Perfect. And yeah, so I'm excited to be with you. I love talking about these things. So I often start the cover slide of my presentations with Lego, and I feel like almost like the astronomy exploration community has a bit of an unfair advantage when it comes to communication, and I'm sure you know that. In this case, even my 14-year-old son was happy to help. It's, you know, we bought another one of many more. We have many Lego sets, and he, you know, we're like happy to buy another one and build one and build something out. But so one of the challenges, though, I think of having this a bit of unfair advantage is that I think there gets to be maybe a tendency to lean on some of those sort of the moves that we use all the time a little bit too much. And I often when I'm giving talks, I sometimes feel a little guilty that I find myself sort of in this space where I'm like trying to suggest additional ways. And so I just want to say at the outset, you guys are doing awesome, wonderful, amazing, beautiful things. And so everything I'm saying is about thinking about how can we be more strategic? How can we be more effective? I always feel a little guilty that I just feel a little guilty sometimes when I'm giving talks. And I think this idea of focusing on a few key strengths is pretty common, even in the research space. Of course, most sort of researchers like me, we lean on specific things that we want to become experts in. For me, it's about how to communicate trust. For another researcher, it's about how to communicate uncertainty. But we're all sort of lean on these things. But part of my goal today is to talk a little bit about some of to try to get, and my work on strategy recently is to try to get the science communicators to think a little broadly about how they communicate. And so, yeah, so Pedro mentioned, so I started out studying public opinion about science. Probably the thing that project I was most involved in that had the most impact on that is for about 10 years, I wrote this report for the National Science Board on public opinion about science in the US and around the world. About 10 years ago, two things happened at the same time though. So Michigan State offered me a job in public relations, which I didn't really think of myself as a public relations professor, but it was a really good job, and I'm Canadian, so it meant I got to move from South Carolina, which is far from the Canadian border, to Michigan, which is right on the Canadian border, be closer to family. But it also, at the same time, I was sort of switching about half my focus towards not just focusing on public opinion about scientists, but scientists' opinion about the public, and specifically about how they communicate with the public. And that's developed I've had this opportunity, that opening slide had all these different funders, and I've had this opportunity over the last 10 years with a colleague, Anthony Dudo and others, to interview a whole range of people involved in the scientific community. A lot of trainers, foundations, people who run fellowship programs, scientific people who do communication at scientific societies. We've also surveyed now about 20,000 scientists, all trying to figure out this idea of how to help the scientific communicate more effectively. And so everything I'm talking about today really comes out of that set of work that I've been doing with Anthony. It's also a really well-timed gig in that I'm working on this project for Kavli and the Department of Energy, and they're doing this conference, the what is it, SciPEP, Science Public Engagement Partnership Conference in July, that I hope a lot of you will look at. It's also a free conference about communication, and what they have this task that they gave me, myself and another couple colleagues, to try to figure out, to look into the science communication literature and try to figure out what does it say about communicating fundamental science, discovery science, or what I'm just going to call basic science. What does it say about that? Is there a literature that specifically focuses on the communication of science when there isn't a goal, when there isn't sort of a clear thing, like a clear behavior where there's an applied topic? You know, we want people to buy electric vehicles, when there isn't that kind of, we want people to do something on climate change. See if there's a literature that's specifically focused around basic science. And my tentative answer is that we've been going through, started with the core sort of what I think of science communication journals, Science Communication, Public Understanding of Science, International Journal of Science Education Part B, and Journal of Science Communication. And the answer we're sort of coming to, is still in progress, is that I would argue that there is no sustained literature specifically focused on basic science communication, which is to say, if you're working in the field of communicating around basic science, I would argue there is no sort of like core literature where everybody's citing, where everybody's sort of working around. And if I think about that, if I think about my own research over the last almost 20 years, I don't think most of my work has been studying things that people are afraid of. I've done stuff on nuclear energy, genetically modified food, hydrogen energy, climate change, anything that people are afraid of, where there's somebody that might want to make a decision about how to protect themselves. And I think that this is sort of endemic into, or not endemic, that's the wrong word, but it's sort of just a part of the way most people who study science communication that I know, how we think. We think about, well, there's some behavioral goal that we want in some specific audience, and I'll keep emphasizing, including ourselves. It might be that we want to change our own behavior, but there's some sort of communication thing that we want to accomplish. And it might be getting people to buy or donate. It might be getting them to buy a different car. It might be getting them to change light bulbs. It might be getting them to take a vaccine. It might be, there's lots of individual behaviors that we could want somebody to do. And so we can figure out a communication strategy around how could we make it more likely that somebody does those behaviors. There's also some sort of, I've taken to calling them pseudo behaviors. I don't know what the right term is, but there's sort of these behaviors that aren't really like behaviors. Voting is a specific behavior, but supporting, accepting. I work with people who study genetically modified food, and they often think that they want people to support them. And I often argue that no, you want people to not oppose you and just go on and worry about other things. But all this to say that if you're doing applied science, the communication bit sort of makes sense because you can sort of work backwards. And I think it's tricky. Again, I should say, but just in terms of definitionally, what I really mean by goals, and I'm going to really push this goals, and I'm going to actually push goals versus objectives, is what do you actually hope will happen? You're going to put time, you're going to put money, you're going to put, all this creative juices into doing some sort of communication. I would argue that most of the time there's something that you want to happen as a result of that. It doesn't necessarily mean you want to, and we'll talk about ethics too, but there's something that you want. And so that's what I really mean by goals. And so I've been thinking about this though in terms of, well, because of this Kavli project, well, are there goals that make sense if you aren't trying to get people to buy an electric vehicle? I mean, if you're not willing to get into communication to say like, hey, I want people to consider at least buying an electric vehicle, with consider being kind of a behavior. Are there ones? And if I look at your literature, and I've been reading the journal, the beautiful journal that you guys publish, and sort of trying to sort of cast around looking at other areas of basic science, neuroscience, nanoscience, which has the sort of nanotechnology part, which is a little more applied side. But thinking about what goals and things that I would consider actual goals might count, I really argue that there's a couple. There's things about making sure of funding. I've noticed a lot of, you guys have a journal space policy, even in your own journal. There's often, in terms of the behavior, if it comes up, is often this, we want to make sure that we ensure robust funding for particularly our science, for astronomy, astrophysics, for NASA, for whatever it is, that we want to make sure that the telescopes get built and the exploration happens. And so often to me, that's a behavior. If you come to me and say, well, I want to make sure we have funding, I can think about strategy. Well, what are the things we need to do to make that happen? The other big one that I see in the literature is this idea of STEM career choice. At least get in terms, again, of behavior, that kids, especially kids from diverse backgrounds, kids from communities who've been too often marginalized and oppressed, that those kids consider a STEM career. To me, that's a behavior, and that's awesome. But again, that's a behavior. That's somebody actually doing something. But there's this other one that I wanted, this other sort of pseudo behavior, and I mentioned it sort of in the context of genetically modified food, but this idea of a behavior of people seeing the legitimacy of science, that just sort of saying like, hey, science is a pretty good way to make sense of the world. It's a pretty good way to make decisions. Cultural value of science, sometimes we might call this. That's also going to be a goal that I'm going to come back to in a second. But so first of all, another thing I want to make sure it's sort of like scene setting is, I'm not talking about nudging or blinking here. When I think about science communication, especially when I think about public engagement, those are fine. Those are wonderful, smart people who are writing these books. I mean, obviously, especially wonderful, smart people who are writing books about how to use behavioral science to sort of nudge people into behaviors without really deeply getting them to cognitively engage. That's sort of that idea of fast communication, system one communication, heuristic communication, peripheral processing. Different literatures call it different things. But what I'm really interested in when I think about science communication, and particularly when I think about this term public engagement, what I'm really thinking about, I'm actually thinking about slow communication. And I think when I think about the ethics of the scientific community, I don't think often, it's fine if we're trying to get people to stop smoking, use nudges. If we're trying to get people to invest in their retirement, use nudges. But individual scientists, individual communicators, for me, those are things that organizations should do, things that scientific societies might get involved in. When I think about the work that I do with individual scientists, what I hear is that they're interested not in sort of tricking people into doing behaviors. And tricking is kind of a fussy word, but the nudge thing isn't often what we're looking for, because we want is this sort of slower, this longer term communication. When I think about engagement, I think of cognitive engagement and getting people to think more deeply about stuff, to slow down and actually form those, what I would call an evaluative belief, a belief that includes, if I say that genetically modified foods are safe isn't just a belief, it's also a belief that has a good component. Or if I think they're dangerous, it's a belief, but it's a evaluative belief. It has a sort of an affect emotion built into the belief. To me, that's what I'm talking about. And what we know about beliefs is that they're things that happen that accumulate over time slowly. We don't just, there's persuasion is sort of like tricking people into doing behavior, but long-term behavior is what we're really thinking about, is how do I change people's evaluative beliefs over the course of a period of time as they gradually accumulate. And when we think about beliefs, and we think about communication that way, in terms of the slow version of communication, I think the academic community's come to a pretty, it's called the integrated behavioral model, theory of planned behavior. We've come to a pretty good consensus over some of the beliefs that tend to drive a behavioral intention, which tend to drive behaviors. And so do you think, in this case, we take funding as our goal behavior, do we think that funding will benefit? Funding a specific type of science, do you think it'll provide more benefits than risks? Do we think it's normatively acceptable? It is, if I do it, my colleagues are going to think it's okay. My colleagues would also do the same thing. And then also these idea of self-efficacy beliefs, which are really quite common in education as well. This idea that, do I feel like we have the money to fund science, a specific area of science? Do we feel like we have the skill to do a behavior? And so whereas we talk about goals as being, what do you actually want to happen? These beliefs, I like to call them, we could call them anything, but for the sake of argument, I'll call them objectives. They're both outcomes, but one is sort of like long-term goal outcomes, objectives as being these sort of short-term belief type outcomes. Of course, we can do that for any behavior is the cool thing, is right? We can think about, well, like, so this is my son Marshall there in the middle, a bunch of years ago. He's 12 now, he's not 12 in that photo. Does he think that choosing a STEM career will be good and will be beneficial and not scary and risky? Does he think that it would be accepted by his peers and that his peers are going to want to do that? Does he think he has the ability, the skills, the wisdom, not wisdom, but the knowledge to go into a STEM career? We can do that for any behavior. That's the cool thing about theorizing communication, right? Is we can think about, well, in general, for any behavior we want, what beliefs might make that more likely? And then we can design communication systems that make those beliefs more likely. Now, I would argue the fundamental challenge of science communication that we've dealt with for years, people who study science communication, people who study lots of different areas, is it would be really nice if we could just teach people about science and they would then make great choices. We know, so this is the National Academies in the US panel we were on a few years ago, or I was on it a few years ago, where we go through the research on science literacy and sort of re-said the thing that we've known for a long time, which is that we know that increasing people's knowledge, science knowledge, their ideas about the facts, how the world works, doesn't tend to change their behavior, which is frustrating and annoying, but it also comes back to why we have to think about these other sort of beliefs. And so we could add that to our model, of course. So we have, it's not that it has no effect, it's just that they're just not the biggest. It's a kind of you don't want to lean on just increasing science literacy and hoping that that results in all the behaviors that you might want. You want to think about other beliefs. Now, it's worth thinking that beliefs themselves are kind of knowledge. If we think about knowledge as a justified true belief, all of these could be knowledge. I know that this is a true risk or a true benefit. I know that this is what my colleagues or my peers think. I know that this is a skill I have. So in a way, beliefs are knowledge, but when we think about it's not science literacy in sort of the classic sense. Now, of course, there's also other things we can do beyond this. I've noticed in looking at your literature over the last couple of months, and this makes perfect sense, given the amazing thing that you're all, truly amazing, awe-inspiring thing here studying, there's a real heavy leaning on trying to use emotions to get people to support science, to choose STEM careers, to go and to buy a telescope, whatever it is. But this idea of leaning on emotions, we can do that, absolutely. That's a thing that we can just sort of, now I have some ethical issues about that. Remember, I'm interested in slow communication. Emotions aren't typically associated with slow communications. And so I'm always a little bit, I'm not an emotions researcher, but I'm always a little bit worried when individual science communicators think it's their job to get people to feel specific emotions. I think it can be done really well, but I also worry it can be done manipulatively, and I worry about dealing with people's emotions is not a minor thing, and so, but it is a thing we can do, right? As a communicator, we can make a choice to, you know what, I want to make them feel awe, and so I'm going to show them these unbelievable photos of galaxies far, far away, and then I'm going to put colors and that's wonderful. The aesthetic appeal. We should absolutely do those things. But again, my point here is I don't want us to just lean on that. If we're doing strategic communication, I want us to think about, yeah, that's one thing that we can do. And there's a whole bunch of different sort of discrete emotions that we can do. One I'm not going to talk about, we can talk about how things are framed. Do we talk about long-term benefits, short-term? Do we talk about this is an environmental issue or it's a health issue? Do we talk about you're going to gain, or do you want to talk about how you're going to lose? It's another thing that we can choose to do through communication. Fun thing, if you take these together, these are beliefs, feelings, and frames, which would be BFFs, best friends forever. But yeah, but those are things we can do when we communicate. Again, these are objectives that we could choose to prioritize when we communicate. Now, I said I wanted to come back to this theory of justice bit, this idea of a goal. One of our goals when we communicate could be, I'm not trying to get a kid to choose a STEM career. I'm not trying to increase funding. My goal is just, I want to, over time, again, slow model of communication, cumulative impacts. Over time, I want to increase beliefs that make it more likely that people turn to science, see science as a legitimate way to make decisions in our societies, which again, I think is a goal that I can get behind. But we might be missing, and we can also think about this in terms of trust. So trust in a social science sense, the sort of the general definition, there's trust, which is a willingness to make oneself vulnerable, but there's also this idea of trustworthiness, or sometimes there's a fairness literature that's similar. We can think about the trust as almost being a behavior, right? I want you to do this to accept a risk, accept a vulnerability, whereas that's not a thing that I can communicate directly. What I can communicate directly is trustworthiness or fairness beliefs. Typically, there's three main ones that we talk about: benevolence beliefs, integrity beliefs, ability beliefs. Benevolence is like equivalent, sometimes people talk about as warmth, caring. I believe that those people, that person cares about people like me. Integrity is, I believe that person's honest. Openness, I believe that person's willing to listen. That really comes from the fairness literature. That person's willing to listen and give me a voice. Ability beliefs, I believe that person knows what they're talking about, has great skills, is competent. There's also this other one that I think is really important. I believe that person shares my values, I have an identity that's congruent with my own. Those are all beliefs, things that we could communicate. And the thing that's really cool about all of these beliefs and feelings is if you know their ingredients, if there's things there to do, we can have wonderful conversations about one, tactics, which I'll talk about tactics in a second. Like, well, if I say to you, your objective is to make sure that people recognize your honesty. I'm like, oh, cool. Now I can start thinking about tactics, things I might say, things I might do that make that more likely. And so that's what's really cool about, I would argue, about beliefs. And the reason, of course, and then making this complicated is because the way I often like to use food metaphors in addition to Lego photos. If you're only leaning on awe and you're only leaning on teaching people science, that's a really bare pantry. Whereas if you think more broadly about the social science of communication, you can start thinking about all the different options you have for potential communication objectives that you could choose to prioritize, that you could, if you have 60 minutes or if you have 600 words, you say, well, do I want to put a little bit of space or time into making sure that people see me as having high integrity? If I do, that means I need to say and do things. And it doesn't always mean taking time in the actual talk, right? It could mean, well, if I want people to believe that I'm willing to listen, maybe I show up to a meeting early or I stay late. Maybe I ask them questions. Maybe I devote more time to Q&A. There's lots of, when you start thinking about tactics, once you have an objective, that tactics discussion becomes really, really fun because you can start sort of ideating around the idea of, yeah, that's the objective. We want to make sure they don't believe that. You can also do research ahead of time to figure out, do they think we're honest? Oh yeah, no, they totally think we're honest. We don't need to put time and resources into increasing that specific group's belief that we're honest because we're already there. We can focus on other stuff. And so yeah, we really want to think about all that. We want to make it this complicated because we want to have a sort of a full pantry. And so yeah, so at the end of the day, I would say if you have, when I think about communication, I think if you have a clear goal, figure out a way to pursue it. If you want people to choose to fund science, awesome. Nothing wrong with saying, I think there's nothing wrong with saying, yes, I think it's important for people to fund science. And here's why. Here's the risks here of not doing it. Here's the benefits of doing it. Here's what other countries are doing. Norms. Here's the, yeah, we can fit it in our budget. Yeah, this is gonna, so you can do, if you have a goal, awesome. If you don't have a goal, I guess the point as a trust researcher, that's cool too. All things, sort of your default goal might be like, you know what, I don't really have a specific thing I want people to do, but wouldn't it be great if people trusted science? And if I think that's my goal, to get people to trust science, see science as legitimate, I should probably make sure that they believe I'm trustworthy, honest, capable, caring, open, skilled, similar to them in lots of ways. And I really worry about this for some communities, in that there's a tendency in the scientific community, which I hope you guys will avoid as you have your days of meetings, of being a jerk for science, calling people idiots, calling people morons, calling people names because they don't agree with you. And it feels good sometimes, and if the people who already like you might like you more, because like, yeah, he's on our side. But I really worry about that. If I think about the goal of legitimacy for science and fostering trust through trustworthiness, I really worry about, and I apologize for the swear word on my screen, but I went onto Twitter and pulled this down from a Twitter account of a relatively well-known person in the astronomy community. I just don't see how this helps being a jerk. And so there's a negative version of this, which is when we're being strategic, we think about, yeah, there's things I shouldn't do because it hurts me in the long run. Is this how we want to be seen? And so, and then more broadly on this tactics question, I think of this as being all the behaviors, messages, tone, style, timing, source, channel, all these choices. That's sort of to loosely Harold Lasswell sort of messed with a Harold Lasswell phrase, this choices about who says what or does what. Those are all those tactics that we can figure out once we know what we're trying to achieve. Once we know what our goal is, and then we figured out which objectives are going to help us achieve that goals, then we can have a conversation about what tactics are going to make sense. One of the challenges, I think, in working with Pedro and the training team is to think about how do we do training on how to tell stories, how to speak clearly. That not only is speaking clearly, but also that we're saying the things that affects the beliefs and the feelings and the frames that we mean to affect. And this is what I mean by strategic, is that we are choosing goals, we're choosing objectives to achieve those tactics, choosing goals, choosing objectives that help us achieve those goals, choosing tactics to help us achieve our objectives. We're seeing the time here. I'm going to do one of these. I'm going to skip that one. Often people ask me about misinformation. Well, shouldn't that be our goal of communication, is to decrease misinformation? So I said, well, what misinformation about what? Misinformation about a fact of science, or maybe misinformation about a person? Like, actually, sorry. First is why I ask is why do you want to decrease misinformation? What do you think will happen if you manage to decrease misinformation? So that's your goal. Like, what behavior do you think will happen? And then I think, well, what misinformation about what? Risks and benefits, norms, all those different beliefs. Those could all be things we could miscommunicate about, misinform about. And then I think about, well, why is this a negative thing? Why are we talking about stopping misinformation? We should be thinking from our own perspective is, what can I share? What information can I put into the world about myself, about your self-efficacy, about what we know about science? There's lots of things we could put out there, and I think that's what we want to focus on, rather than just sort of preventing people. And it all comes together in this, this is sort of my summary slide, where we think about, we have goals at both the front end, we set our goals, and at the back end, where we evaluate, did we achieve our goals? We set our objectives. Cool thing about objectives, if you say my objective is to make sure that we increase the degree to which people see us as having high integrity, I can then evaluate against that objective. In the short term, did this person seem honest? In the long term, how honest are scientists in general? And those tactics then come in the middle, but they're about helping us achieve our other objectives. And I believe that is the last slide, and we can go to chatting. Thank you so much for letting me share this with you. I love talking about this stuff, and yeah, I look forward to chatting.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Thank you for this. It was very thought-provocative in many ways, and I think we're gonna have some discussion about it and about some of the concepts and some of the ideas that you are presenting here. Maybe I'll start with a quick question. You are doing this project that you are looking at the way that the basic sciences are or are not communicating, and of course you identify already these two main, let's say, behavioral goals, like you put it. are they consistent across these disciplines? For example, the ones that you identify or pre-identify in astronomy are the ones that you also identify in neurosciences, in nanotechnology, or you see different community goals in terms of behavior?
Yeah, and so I would argue that they're common, not just across science communication, about all communication. At the end of the day, there's two things, right? There's actual behaviors, which are like, do this thing. And there's sort of pseudo behaviors, which might be accept this thing, which is sort of don't not do this thing, see legitimate. And so there's really sort of these two types of behaviors. And then it's just a matter of like, well, depending on what field you're in, is it I want people to eat this thing, or I want people to buy this thing, or I want people to vote for this person, or I want people to, and then but the legitimacy is I want people to accept this decision. And so conceptually, it's the same across all communication. And then in terms of the fields, yeah, I think some fields focus a little more on funding. Like, so I think in the astronomy, funding comes up a little bit more. If you're, what I usually study, if you're in the nuclear space or the genetically modified food space or the nanotechnology space, it's about the behavior is use a specific product. If I'm in a health communication space, it's get a vaccine, drink less, smoke less. Each community has their own sort of choice behaviors. When I work with a community of scientists on being strategic, it's like, well, let's try to figure out what the behavior is. Because often what will happen is people say, well, what's our goal? Well, we want to engage. Well, engage on what? Engage on what's the behavior? What, if you engage, what do you hope will happen? So we've done surveys on this, I should also say. We're asking scientists about what goals are. And the number one goal is always, we want policymakers to consider scientific evidence. We've included one where we also ask, choose specific policies. And that's ranks really lowly, but highly is consider, we just want decision makers, whether it's government or whether it's like work I do, landowners, to consider scientific evidence. And so, yeah, conceptually, it's the same across everything. And then each field has their own space, their own sort of specific thing.
Thank you. There's a bunch of questions that are coming in now, and then maybe I'll start with the first one from Caroline. And it's maybe you can use the slide that we have on screen for this conversation. Of course,
I wasn't sure. I want to leave it up. Yeah, I can.
Yeah, just for now, because one of the question is about this: if the goal is to have society to trust more science, do you think that one of the tactics could be for society to understand better how science operates? What's the scientific method? You know, going back to this public understanding of science. I think the question is public understanding of science approach a good tactic for the goal of getting the public to trust science?
I haven't seen any evidence. So it's a really tricky thing to study in one way, because the ways that people learn about the process of science means it's a lot of interaction with scientists in the scientific community. And so there's sort of like this problem of it's hard to do an experiment on this, right? Because over time, the people who learn about the process of science spend a lot of time around people who identify as scientists or science teachers or science educators. And so they build up strong beliefs, trust. So essentially, the process of science is really, I would argue, about integrity, about willingness to listen to outside voices, right? Those are the characteristics that make science pretty awesome. And so it's really hard to know. So yes, I think you can communicate about the process of science as a way to try to build trustworthiness beliefs. But I wouldn't want to just do that. If I was going to do that, I'd want to emphasize, I'd want to talk about, here's how the process of science ensures integrity. Here's how the process of science ensures openness. Here's how so I'd want to be very intentional about, if I'm using scientific process knowledge to foster beliefs in trustworthiness beliefs, integrity, openness, especially, I'd want to do that really intentionally. I wouldn't want to just hope that if I taught them how science works, that would lead to those beliefs.
Maybe, John, I think there's some colleagues that they are asking for some clarification in terms of the term belief in your model, because of course, I think for most of us in our community, when you think about belief, it's something that it's almost like these things that you accept without a proof, without a fact. And but I think you are using the term belief in a very different context. So maybe you can expand a bit the terminology.
Yeah. And so in social science, a belief is the nugget of, that's our, like, one of our smallest particles, right? That's a belief is when I say that I believe somebody is honest, that is a belief about how that is a my understanding of how the world really is, right? And so it's, if I'm correct, it's knowledge. If I'm incorrect, it's not knowledge and it's a problem. But it's not a belief in terms of I believe in God. It's I believe this thing. And so, you know, I believe that the earth goes around the sun is a belief. And so I've tried to find other terms because I know sometimes we use the term belief colloquially. But if you think about most of the things that we think about the world, I believe my mother loves me is a belief. I believe it's an evaluative belief in the sense that it's good that I think my mother loves me. But it's still a belief in the sense. And so does it have proof? Sure. In a sense of my experience is proof, but that's how I mean belief. It's this sort of fundamental structure. When we say, so people will often say attitudes and beliefs. And that's a weird thing to say because an attitude is the sum of your evaluative beliefs. So if my attitude towards space exploration or funding of my attitude towards funding of astronomy is based on my beliefs about, is that going to help the country? Is that going to help people that I care about? It's around my beliefs about what other countries are doing, what other countries think they should be doing, what other people in my social network, my beliefs about the degree to which that we have as a country the ability to do that. And so, yeah, so beliefs is just the sort of this, it's the thing that everything else is formed of in the social science context, along with feelings and frames.
Yes, BFF. John, another question, I think something that is resonating quite a lot with the audience is this idea of the slow science communication, of the slow communication. I think it's normal. But I think we see a lot of questions of people asking, how do you think that we can really implement a slow science communication process when we are living in such a fast-paced digital media environment like social media, right? And you please keep in mind that most of our colleagues attending the conference, they work for institutions, organizations where they have to have a very active social media presence. They need to answer to the needs on that particular day, the press releases, the news media cycles. So how do you think that we can break that cycle and really have a more slow approach to our work?
Yeah, that's I love that. So we thought a lot about this. And so, how do I want to, I'm on the wrong slide here. So the world is fast. Of course, people have been saying the world is getting faster since the world existed. Everybody says the world is getting faster. But if you think about it in terms of cumulative impact, right? So one of the things so when you get into studying media effects, communication effects, it's a little bit disappointing at first because it's really actually hard to have an effect on most things through communication. Like, yeah, we can nudge people, we can, and sort of we're sort of behaviorally get people to do a thing sometimes, but over time, to really change beliefs over time takes time because even the world's getting faster. People still have this the same limited attention. People still have the same 24 hours in a day. People are still being exposed to content, you know, in similar amounts. And so it's just a question. I think it's important to think that unless you've there's some things that are going to be big catastrophes, risks that happen and that have these big effects on public opinion. But if you look at the way that attitudes towards companies or issues change, there might be some variability, but generally they're sort of in predictable sort of trends over time, or not predictable, but things move relatively slowly because each person is affected differently. People's beliefs change more or less depending on how much attention they're paying. Depends on how much exposure they're having. And so it's important if you're doing communication to not get caught up in everything's a crisis, I need to do now. You have to think about, I think, the thing about being strategic is about thinking, yes, this is important today, but it's not the be all and end all. It's the over time that matters. If I think about this from the scientific community, so one of the things, if I think about this from the scientific community versus the politician world, a politician, depending on what kind of politician, has to get reelected every 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, depending on the context, right? 5 years. And all they have to do is at that specific point in time, get let's say a plurality of the votes, whatever your voting system is. Science isn't like that. We kind of want science to be important forever. And so they can use negative campaigns. They can use these things that get them past that hurdle and then hope to try to rebuild for 2 years or 4 years. As a scientific community, we can't do that. We have to build trust forever. If we wreck it, we're going to have to slowly build it back up. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just this, the slowness is just a function of people. I mean, people's, yes, the community, another way to say this, the world is moving fast, people's beliefs aren't moving fast, right? If you track those. And so that's what we're dealing with, including our own belief. I should have said one other thing, I should have said our own belief. All throughout this, you can communicate and design communication that's meant to change your own beliefs. That's what consultation is. I'm going to figure out if I'm doing the right research, if I'm doing the research in the right way. I'm going to learn about that, which I'm going to develop beliefs, and then but I can create tactics that make it more likely that I learn. And so all of this applies to me as well. I can design communication that affects myself.
Maybe, John, I would like to expand a bit on that, because some of the questions here is about this idea of public participation. You know, we can think about citizen science and other type of initiatives. And how do you place citizen science and other, let's say, community-based participatory approaches within your model? Do you think that we do it because we are trying to change the beliefs that we have in the scientific community?
Yeah, so we should be. I mean, so too often we're not, though. So this is the hardest thing. I've given I give the versions of this talk on a bunch and talk about this a lot of times. And the hardest thing we have talking about is this idea of, well, where does two-way communication fit into this? And the way it fits into this, for me at least, and if you look on this slide, it's actually divided in top and bottom. Can I point at it? What behaviors am I open to changing? And so when I go into any communication activity, I should be thinking about, well, am I doing the right thing? I want to build this thing. Maybe I don't want to build this thing. I have to be open to changing. If it's citizen science, I'm like, we're going to collect some data. I'm not just trying to affect those people. I also want to learn something, and maybe that affects how I do the next project, or maybe that changes how I do this project. There's always this potential that we're changing our communication. But at the tactical level, that gets into the degree to which we're really designing it so that we have that opportunity to change our own beliefs, and that we're really open to letting those new beliefs, those new feelings, those new frames change what we're actually doing. Now, the weird thing about that is the beliefs that I change might not be the same as the beliefs that the people I interact with change. And so it gets into a weird thing of like, and so the ethics of this is tricky, but I really think pretending we don't have goals is even more ethically fraught than at least recognizing that we have our goals and being open about how we're trying to achieve them. I really worry a lot about us, oh no, we're just sharing information for the sake of sharing information. We're sharing astronomy stuff because we think it's cool and we hope you'll love it. Yeah, but don't you really kind of want people to continue to fund you and continue to put research and resources into these things? If that's the case, I think you got to say it. But at the same time, you're changing your own belief. Like, yeah, but maybe we should, if we were being responsive, maybe we would put more emphasis on this part of astronomy and less on this, because that's what I've learned, and that's what. And so this openness to change stuff within within the scientific community is core to all of this, but really hard to talk about sort of simultaneously.
Yeah, I also like your idea of the honesty in terms of the goals and putting them up front when we are starting to design communication approaches. So I think we have only 3 minutes. I have two last questions and for the discussion, and they are somehow connected with some of the questions here. One of them is that about the goals, right? I mean, you identify this funding, and the other one is the idea of the people to know more about astronomy. And do you think that we should be looking at some other specific goals in our field, or do you think that those goals, they make sense within what you have seen in the literature, in the research that you're doing?
Get back to that slide. Yeah, so I think,
exactly.
I think so. Obviously, funding is always, every scientific field needs to, if you think you're important, you need to be responsible for making sure that you continue to get a slice of the pie. You also might be interested, so there's the funding for your specific area. There's also funding for science in general. You might want to contribute to making that more likely, right? So that could be an objective. Now, and then STEM career choice, that makes perfect sense, because again, I think it's one of the cool things is it's clear, if I go back to the Lego thing, there is a thing about astronomy, astrophysics, space that is appealing to a certain group of people. And if you can use that particular appeal, that benefit, that unfair advantage to get more people into science, awesome. That's great. But then, like, when I start thinking about, like, what are other things that you want? One of the things I find is that sometimes individual scientists have their basic research, but maybe they go into applied area, and so maybe their goals are built around their applied areas where they want people to do specific behaviors. But then for me, the bigger thing, if you don't have one of those goals, is to think about, well, could just make the world, make science an important part of society? Can I just generally, even more generally, just give people a good experience with science? Like it doesn't even matter if you're not sure if you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I just want to make sure people have good experience. If we think about that cumulative exposure idea, a good experience is not a minor thing. More good experiences than bad experiences, especially. A good experience with science, a good experience with scientists. Be that awesome scientist to be like, that person was cool. She was awesome. She was the thing. Like, just whatever, just be awesome. Don't be a jerk. That's pretty good. And that, like, gets us to this, strong place for science and society, I think, over time, cumulatively.
Perfect. John, I think that's a super nice way for closing our session. Let's create good experiences, especially with goals, and let's be honest with the goals. And I know that this was the first time that you come to our CAP conference. Thank you so much for joining us. But I also know that you are staying around because of your position in the steering committee for the IAU Kavli project for public engagement training. So I'm sure they're going to meet many of our community members in the years to come. John, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to go ahead with the plenary sessions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I look forward to future stuff. I'm easy to find.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye-bye, John. So, okay. That's it. That was our Kavli keynote speaker, and it was great to see to have John. So I think we are ready to go and move on to our next speaker. As you know, we're going to have a combination between live talks and also some of them recorded talks. And for the first one, I'm going to invite the presenters led by Alejandro López, and they're going to give a talk about listening to other voices, culturally sensitive sites group. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining. I think also Stephen and Javier they are here with us. So please feel free to start sharing your screen, and Annette is also joining us. Yeah. And feel free to start sharing your screen, and I think we're ready to go.
Yeah, a second. I try to share the screen. I think it's not working.
I guess it's because we have too many of us on stage.
You need many to leave.
So one of us needs to leave, and one of you can come back then for the discussion. I don't know.
Okay, I will leave.
Okay, Javier, thank you so much. Perfect. Now you should be able to share your screen.
Yeah.
And then Alejandro can join us for the discussion. Alejandro, the microphone and the screen is yours.
Okay. I put the presentation. Okay. Well, hi, we are Alejandro, Javier, Annette, and Stephen. Today we are talking to all of you about listening to other voices, culturally sensitive sites group. This is a new joint initiative from IAU Division C Working Group on Art Astronomy and Astronomy in Culture, Royal Astronomical Society, and American Astronomical Society. Our main objective here is to use everything we have learned from decades of cultural astronomy studies to help the academic astronomical community to better understand the conceptions, values, political tensions, and cultural interests at stake when seeking to install and maintain astronomical facilities. We need to understand that every knowledge is related to the society that produces it and also to power. Also the astronomical knowledge of the academic community. We live in a diverse and unequal world. If we want to avoid being colonial agents, we need to see the diversity of human ways of living and thinking, not as a problem, but as a wealth. Not naively, but understanding that diversity is articulated with inequality. Today, academic astronomy is deeply related with large observational instruments which are developed by international consortiums formed by universities, government, enterprises. They manage a lot of money and have precise and predefined schedules. We need a lot of land distant from urban centers, in many cases dry areas in high regions. In many of these places, there are not large buildings or permanent settlements, and they are not important for industries. Because of these reasons, are considered by these consortiums as deserts that are not important for anyone. But you know, many of these summits are crucial for the local people. In some cases, they are sacred places, crucial features of their landscapes, inhabited during some moments of the year, or sites of pilgrimage. When you see in detail the procedures of these large consortiums, you can see that they use the same pioneer discourse that employs the extractive oil or mining companies. We are pioneers of civilization and development. And in the case of astronomical facilities, also there is the idea of science as a selfless activity, whose initiatives are always good for everyone, and nobody can reject without being accused of being obscurantist. When these big consortiums think in the public, they are thinking about the people of the countries and social classes to put money in their projects. According to their agendas, they usually talk more about the environment than the local people concerns. Usually, they use a top-bottom politics. First, talk with national governments, and finally descend to the local people to communicate to them the decisions that were made for them. In the best cases, they are allowed to suggest some slight modifications. They offer as incentives small improvements in infrastructure or services that are actually a small part of what will be warranted to this population just because they are inhabitants of the world and citizens of their countries. They forget that the right to free, prior, and informed consent is not a generous gift, it's only an act of justice. Also, if these consultations do not include the possibility to reject the project, are not true consultations. Projects of this magnitude with the impact they produce will be a joint development with local communities from the beginning. Scientists cannot act without taking into account that local populations are systematically underrepresented in government agencies. We need to make a very strong epistemological vigilance to avoid the risk of reproducing colonial patterns in the name of science. And we have good tools to do that. Cultural astronomy must play a key role in the articulation of academic astronomy community and local populations. We need to be involved with people if we work with people. We need to point the way for governments and industries and not the opposite. Now, we talk about some case studies. Some of them show big conflicts and illustrate a wrong management of these issues. Some others offer better practices. The first case study is the TMT conflict in Mauna Kea, Hawaii. The general frame of the situation, you know, is the long colonial history in the region. We need to understand in this context the telescope installations since the 60s. These early facilities were installed without prior informed consultation. Mauna Kea volcano is seen as a place of unique connection between Kanaka Maoli and their ancestors, a crucial site for their cultural landscape. It plays an integral role in Hawaii's water and ceremonial cycles. It has numerous shrines and offerings, and these mountains is an important burial ground. The present TMT conflict are linked with the breach of agreements about new telescopes in Mauna Kea. Many Hawaiian indigenous people feel indignation about the land lease. They think that this project is culturally destructive, impractical, offensive, and not inclusive. Hundreds of protectors have been blocking access of Mauna Kea to the builders of TMT. As you can see in this case, the telescope's protests are only the top of the iceberg. The deeper issues are the struggles for cultural, political, and economic rights. The telescopes are an icon of colonial relations. Now I leave you with Annette.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Annette, maybe before you start, I can ask Alejandro quickly to ocultar the small warning that he has on these slides. But please go ahead.
Mitakuye Oyasin to all my relations. My name is Annette Lee. I am mixed race Lakota. I'm speaking to you today from the land we call Mani Sota Makoche, the land where the water reflects the sky. Minnesota, US. This is the original territory of the Dakota and later Ojibwe peoples, my communities. I'm here today to share two examples, important examples of this work. The first example is the Stardust Project. We are Stardust. Alejandro, can you click the slide? Thank you. This is a collaboration between my organization, Native Skywatchers, between Starry Starry Night, led by Raja at UC Santa Cruz, and the Volcanoes School that's located 1 hour south of Mauna Kea. This project is at the intersection of science, art, and culture. Educators and students from the Volcanoes School engage with astronomers during their actual research remotely on the Keck 2 telescope, asking questions, learning the science story. Then with that, they weave together a piece of art that they create, telling their own personal relationship to the stars. And the third part is they connect that art to the bigger umbrella of culture, in whatever that means to them. I'm really proud of this project because it combines Indigenous-led voice with productions. We are elevating our voices. You can hear more about this tomorrow in session 17.2, day 2. Next slide, please. Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. In Lakota way of knowing, the Pahasapa is the center of everything, the center of the universe. It is the most sacred place in the universe. And many of our Lakota constellations and ways of knowing are related and embedded in that land, and the earth and sky mirrored relationship plays out there. A little bit on the history. In 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty recognized the Black Hills as Sioux territory. The problem? 6 years later, gold was discovered, and the land was illegally taken. Believe it or not, in 1980, this case was taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, and guess what? The Sioux Nation won. It was decided that the land was illegally taken by the U.S. government, and they offered to pay the price of the land in the 1880s. The Sioux Nation did not accept it. So when I was asked to give a keynote presentation at the Stanford lab located in Lead, South Dakota on the Black Hills, I had to really think about this and pray about this, and I decided to reach out to my Lakota elders and relatives, Indigenous knowledge holders, so together we could create a presentation with integrity and meaning and that would relate to this history. I feel strongly that we have to figure out how to move forward in a good way. I'll end with this quote: "The path forward can only be forged by recognizing the past and acting for our future." Pilamia Miigwech, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I think that Alejandro,
No,
are you going to present?
It's my
You're
turn now.
muted.
Thank you, Annette. The next case study is the SKA, which is a very different
Javier,
case.
you're muted.
Really? Can you hear me now?
No, I can, yes.
Okay, sorry. I was saying that, thank you, Annette. The next case study is the SKA, which is a very different case than the one explained in Hawaii. The SKA is being developed in 2 different indigenous lands, consulted from the beginning of the process, and already fully approved by indigenous communities. It's in South Africa's Karoo region and Western Australia's Murchison Shire. The Australian Aboriginal Yamaji and South African San peoples have unique ways to explain why the sky looks what it does. One of the activities made across the project is inviting indigenous artists from both regions by the SKA scientists to do paintings and other art representations based on their traditional stories about the night sky. The concept was named SKA Star Sky and resulted in a exciting form of sharing knowledge between Western and indigenous sky knowledge. The next one, please, Alejandro. Of course, this is just one of the activities developed in the project, but shows the different approach, the very different approach, including indigenous peoples from the beginning of the project, and the willingness of learning from others. The consequences of this approach can be seen summarized here with some of the opinions gathered between indigenous people, Western scientists, and general public. I will just remark the first one, the words of Charmaine Green, Jamari Arts Center, SKA SAR Sky Australia. It was a two-way thing between the scientists, SKA leads it out to Bollardi, and a different way of looking at the sky and sharing our stories with the SKI people, and also with the rest of the world. You can go back and compare these declarations with the one expressed with a TMT project, for example. The next one, please. And the next one. The next case study is the Morathan project, is the first Central American space experience as a region. The project focused on early warning system in floods and knowledge of hydrographic basins in Honduras, Guatemala, and Costa Rica. This is one of the main problems in the hurricane season in the region, and mainly affects indigenous territories and communities traditionally outside of public policies. For this reason, from the very beginning of the project, this is a community approach is being carried, and which members of these peoples, mainly Lenca people, Maya people, and Cabeca peoples, works at the location of the stations to collect data, manage this data, and they'll be training on making decisions for the communities, allowing them to change the paradigm of disaster response versus community prevention. The Central American academics joins respecting and learning indigenous worldviews through specific workshops with the original people involved, in particular with regard to the sky and water, with deep roots in the way of seeing the universe from the point of view of the indigenous peoples. The next one, Alejandro.
You have one minute.
Okay.
You have to close the session.
We need to move forward then.
Okay. Perfect. Go ahead.
So I can close this. Anyway, just some quick background on our effort here. It's a joint initiative, like you saw, between in November of 2020, the RAS went to the IAU, and then they came to us at the WGAC, and then the AAS joined as well. And we're excited and honored to be tasked with this important endeavor to share these ideas with astronomers around the world. And we had our first meeting in December of 2020. Next slide. And our committee objectives provide insight for indigenous sensitivities like we're doing today, plus create public outreach programs and also best practices guidance, not only for existing observatories, but ones in the future. Next slide. Our planned presentations, this is our very first one today, right now, and then also next month in June for AAS 238, in July in the RAS National Astronomy Meeting, and then some others that we're getting on our schedule. Will be more to be added. Next slide. So it's just our privilege to put this whole effort forth, not only the four of us today, but also the entire team, which includes Megan Argo, Richard Feinberg, Dwayne Hamaker, Jarita Holbrook, Ray Honeysett, Steve Miller, Wayne Orchison, Rosa Ross, and Awana Sandhu, and Stephen Tingay, and also Gudrun Wolfschmidt. And there's their organizational affiliations and locations. And next slide. So we'd just like to thank you for letting us share this information with you today on behalf of Alejandro, Javier, Annette, and myself, and also the rest of the team. We're setting up a website, but for the time being, in the future, if you have questions, you can contact me at my email address here, and then I will just leave this to Alejandro, and we will close for the day.
Thank you, Stephen, and also Javier and Alejandro and Annette for the presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. However, I hope that you're going to stay the rest of the day and maybe also in the next day, so people can contact you directly through the Hopping platform, and they can ask you questions. So we're going to move on, and we're going to move to the recorded talks. So we have a list of recorded talks that we have 3 ahead. So we're going to have 10 minutes videos, and then we're going to ask the presenters to come on stage to have a 5-minute discussion. So our next talk, and I'm going to ask Samir to just start loading the talk if possible, is going to be by Sally Macfarlane, and it's about a digital dome look at African astronomy.
Hello, my name is Sally Macfarlane, and I'm a postdoc with the University of Cape Town. I also work with the Idea Visualization Lab, where we work to visualize and engage with some of the largest scientific data sets using tools such as virtual reality, as well as digital domes. For instance, the Aziko Planetarium and Digital Dome that you see in that image there, that's based in Cape Town. For my talk today, I'm going to be discussing the unique capabilities of modern planetarium or digital domes and how we can harness these capabilities in order to promote some of Africa's greatest artistic and scientific achievements. So just why is producing local digital dome content so important? I remember many years ago being taken to the Aziko Planetarium and Digital Dome by my grandfather. And one of the things I loved the most was being able to relate what I saw in the dome to the night skies that I saw outside. Many years later, I now work at the same planetarium as a presenter and educator. Although we have lots of wonderful shows, most of these shows are Northern Hemisphere based. And one of the questions I get asked most by the audience is, where is all the South African astronomy? This is just a small selection of the astronomy facilities located in Southern Africa. Africa has a wealth of astronomical achievements spanning millennia. Just looking at the last few decades, we've made vast strides into astronomy research. However, despite this, the public still remain largely unaware of these facilities, their research, or indeed of their significance. Fortunately for us, the fully immersive nature of digital domes means that they are ideal tools for visualization and education. Much like the pride that is felt for various sporting achievements, by producing local content, we hope to promote a similar sense of pride in Africa's various scientific achievements.
Sorry, Ron, you make it slow to pause and
the Aziko Planetarium and Digital Dome
Samira, I think we need to load again the video, right?
yes, sorry about that.
It also has a schools program and is one of the few planetaria in the world which has an active research component. So the Idea Visualization Lab has got a number of different projects which work to produce local content, not only for public shows, but for research as well. So the research component, we hope to efficiently visualize some of the biggest data in order to keep the public informed of current research, local or otherwise. And this forms part of what's called the Data to Dome initiative. This is an initiative of the International Planetarium Society. The Idea Viz Lab also conducts research into the effective use of the planetarium as an educational tool, specifically in undergraduate studies. The Viz Lab also looks into local content production, both in terms of its research and public shows, in order to promote some of the country and continent's multidisciplinary achievements. In the research that's being conducted by the Idea Visualization Lab, we are able to look at 3D data catalogs, velocity cubes, or volumetric renderings. In the video that you're looking at there, that is taken from within the planetarium itself. What you see is that we're busy flying around a small volumetric rendering of the Milky Way, and in the background is what's called the 2-mass photometric redshift catalog, or 2MPZ. Here, each point of light is a galaxy of 100 billion stars, and the color coding indicates clustering. So red points represent large galactic clusters, and blue points are solitary galaxies. So those are typically further away. you can start to see how this gives us a new eye on our data. We begin to view from different perspectives and perhaps can get different insight into the research itself. And it's not just astronomy. As you can see with this volumetric rendering of a mouse brain. So what you're looking at here is essentially a heat map where color coding indicates muscular activity of the mouse. And this is work done by Professor Ben Lewis of the Neuro Research Group at Stellenbosch University. So by looking at data sets such as these, you can start to see how the digital dome can be used as an effective educational tool, both for the researcher as well as the public. Over the last couple of slides, I've introduced you to some of the research that's been conducted by astronomers and scientists right here in Africa. But what about producing content for public shows and school shows? We know that the public should be exposed to relatable astronomy concepts that seek to bridge such challenges as language barriers. We need to be able to embrace and develop a sense of pride about our astronomical achievements and what shows that celebrate our astronomical heritage. Of course, this is all in addition to having up-to-date access to some of the latest research. So in order to address some of these challenges, Daniel Kahnemer of the South African Astronomical Observatory and myself have been working towards creating more digital dome African content. So with this goal in mind, Daniel and myself, along with the local production company VR Capture, have produced Rising Star. This is the first full length, so 24-minute in this case, full dome, high resolution planetarium film about South African astronomy. Rising Star will take you on a journey right from our beginnings in astronomy in South Africa through some of the current research, and we'll look at what the future holds for astronomy in the country. Along the way, we look at what multi-wavelength and multi-messenger astronomy is, and we take the audience to remote astronomy facilities such as the Southern African Large Telescope, as well as Meerkat. And we released the Rising Star to the public last year on the 3rd of November, and we hope to release internationally very soon. So that will be freely distributed. But let me not talk any more about it. I've got a small teaser trailer to show you next. Rising Star is accessible to all ages and aims to excite both national and international audiences about South African astronomy. One of our primary goals in creating this film was to encourage the production of more local content. In fact, to keep up the momentum, Daniel and myself have been working together with an excellent production team on our next film. So this short film will form part of a series of similar such films all about African star lore and beliefs from remote communities across Southern Africa. This new film is a project of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, which is an initiative of the National Arts Council based in South Africa. It's also a project of the African Planetarium Association. So to find out more news, please check their website. So they'll be publishing more news about this project, as well as that of Rising Star. You can see in the image there that's taken of a salt pan in the Kalahari, so absolutely gorgeous, and forms part of the scenery that features in our new film. This new film will feature the stories of and cultural beliefs of the Ngomani San community, and they're based in the Kalahari as indicated in the map. The film itself will be a combination of live action as well as animation. Here is a sneak preview of some of the images you may expect to find in the film. In order to increase accessibility, we will be producing a two-dimensional flat version of the film, and we'll also be including multiple languages. So the film itself is shot primarily in local dialect of Nama and Afrikaans, and will have English subtitles. These subtitles will of course be available to be translated into any international language. So please keep an eye out for this film. Hopefully this will be the first of many local productions that celebrate Africa's rich cultural heritage and numerous achievements. If you'd like to get in touch with me regarding anything that I've said or regarding the production of local content, please feel free to either email me at sallymac@gmail.com or visit my website, vislab.idea.ac.za, for any news of upcoming productions. Please also keep an eye on the African Planetarium Association if you're interested in finding out more about some of the production of local content, as any new updates regarding Rising Star or this new film or future films will also be mentioned there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sally. And then we have Sally here now with us. I think we have some time for a few questions about your presentation. And maybe I'll start with the first one. It actually is also coming from the Q&A from the participants. Rising Star is ready. It's already, I think you're already showing it at the Planetarium in Cape Town. And one of the questions was about the languages. In how many languages is the Planetarium show available? And I think the question was because, of course, South Africa is such a rich country in terms of languages. So I'd like to expand on that in terms of the languages that the show is available.
Yes, so thank you very much for the question. And that's actually one of the reasons why we started producing this content. It's only available in English at the moment, but we have our next plans are to produce it in Afrikaans and then in isiXhosa, and then to go to as many languages as possible. At first with South African languages, but then we'll release it to the world. And I think that's one of the drives, is to make it as accessible as possible and have as many languages.
And when can we expect to have at least the Rising Star available for the international audience?
Oh, that's a very good question. So we've just finished testing out. So there were a few things that we were testing, and now we're going to start just finding a good distribution place, and we'll start approaching different groups to distribute it online internationally. And
last question about the Rising Star, and it seems like, and even your next production, it seems that you have this amazing footage and amazing content from all astronomy that is done from South Africa, but also in South Africa, and now even expanding to the neighboring countries. So the question from our participants, one of our participants, is about how do you find the right balance between, knowledge of astronomy that is being advanced by everyone around the world and the knowledge that you actually produce in South Africa or in Southern Africa? How do you find that balance between the content?
So, sorry, can you just repeat that question?
I guess the question is more because, of course, if you're talking about some of the concepts that we have in astronomy are very global and they've been discovered done by many different scientists all around the world. But of course, you are trying to focus a bit on the science done from and by South Africa. How do you find the right balance between the two?
Well, I think this is also one of our opportunities, is to give Africa a stage now, because we don't have that many productions that celebrate our own achievements as well. All of our achievements, we have collaborations all over the world, but we've also got some collaborations that are specific to Africa at the moment, and this is what we want to celebrate and to show the world as well. This is what we can do, and we can work together for the future. So everything just working together, I think would be amazing. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Sally. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sorry about the small technical issues that we had in the beginning of your video. We'll make sure that your video then is accessible to everyone so they can watch it properly later on. But thank you so much for joining us at the
Thank you very
Plenary,
much.
and well done. And we are looking forward to seeing your next production.
Okay. No, thank you very much.
Okay, let's move then to the next recorded talk by Jennifer Claydon, and she's going to talk about building a legacy, STEM clubs in low socioeconomic areas of the UK.
Welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Claydon from the National Schools Observatory. I'm going to be talking about our STEM club initiative and how we're building clubs in areas of England with high areas of socioeconomic disadvantage. I'll also talk about how we're evaluating the project and how our work with schools has reacted to the COVID-19 pandemic. For those who are not familiar with the term, when I say STEM, I'm talking about an approach to learning and development that integrates the areas of science, technology, engineering, and maths. I'll talk about our project in further detail in a moment, but first, a brief introduction to who the National Schools Observatory are to put our work in context. The National Schools Observatory, or NSO, is part of the Astrophysics Research Institute at Liverpool John Moores University. The department owns and operates the Liverpool Telescope, which is a 2-metre fully robotic telescope located on La Palma in the Canary Islands. The National Schools Observatory was launched in 2004 and connects schools to the Liverpool Telescope so that they can request their own observations remotely in a straightforward way and without breaking the telescope. We use the inspirational topic of space to engage and empower young people to get more involved in STEM subjects. We do this through the NSO website, so anyone can register at schoolsobservatory.org to use the telescope and access our wide range of activities. We have a wide range of observing programs, so schools can observe the moon, planets in our solar system, or even galaxies beyond our own. So a question the NSO is continually trying to answer in a variety of ways is how to raise aspirations and awareness of opportunities to study and work in STEM fields. Those from socially disadvantaged groups are consistently underrepresented in science and engineering, particularly in senior roles. So part of the change needs to start with interventions while young people are in school, particularly before students make subject choices that influence their future. And in the UK, these choices often take place before the age of 16. So this project is part of a response to that question, and the project is using astronomy to create STEM clubs in schools in low science capital areas, and it's part funded by the UK Research and Innovations Science and Technologies Facilities Council. I'm just going to clarify what I mean by STEM clubs and what I mean by science capital. So STEM clubs are extracurricular clubs that traditionally take place after school or otherwise outside of lesson time. And they involve activities themed around science, engineering, technology, and maths in a fun and informal way. They may be run by a science teacher, but often more likely to be run by a technician or teaching assistant. The benefits of STEM clubs include enriching and broadening the curriculum outside the confines of what children must learn within lessons. They give young people the opportunity to encounter new topics and develop their own interests. They also have the benefit of opportunities to boost confidence, improve social and teamwork skills, as well as developing STEM skills and the love of STEM topics. And for staff, there's the benefit of maybe trialing activities that then could later be incorporated into lessons or trialing new approaches to teaching STEM. The concept of science capital was developed by researchers at the Institute of Education at University College London. Science capital incorporates an individual's science-related knowledge, attitudes, experiences, and resources that they build up throughout their life. So what they know about science, what they think about science, who they know and talk to about science, and what they do outside of school that's linked to science. And science capital is been shown to be one way to assess how likely it is that young people will aspire to study science in the future. So in this project, we're using the idea of science capital as a method to assess that we're reaching the intended target audience. The aims of this project are to set up and support STEM clubs in disadvantaged areas across the UK, to affect a positive influence on attitudes towards STEM within the schools, and the most important thing, to create a simple, manageable route for other similar schools to start their own STEM clubs. In terms of evaluating the project, for aim 1, we're collecting quantitative data, and we've developed a survey produced in conversation with researchers at UCL to measure the science capital of the students involved. To evaluate project aim 2, we have built this evaluation around our own internal evaluation framework, which is based on a set of generic learning outcomes. For this project, we're focusing our evaluation on effects on participants' feelings and behaviour towards science. These STEM clubs are designed to promote participants to feel empowered to do science and inspired to find out more. They're not designed to specifically increase understanding or skills, though that might occur. And the third aim, this will take time really to see if what schools we work with will continue to offer clubs and past our intervention, and it'll take time for us to gather data on the number of schools in socio-economically deprived areas who request our STEM club, request to use our STEM clubs in the future. But we can evaluate this partly through whether we produce a successful case study, present at conferences, share our findings. So the intention is that through this project, we create a self-contained package for schools to use to start STEM clubs. So we want to overcome any barriers that schools may face to doing so. And barriers to schools starting a STEM club can include lack of staff time, lack of staff confidence or knowledge in the subject, and the burden of having to find fun activities to engage the students with week after week. To support schools to overcome these barriers, we've produced a suite of STEM club booklets themed around the inspirational topic of space. And the main goal of this project will be to understand how well these resources support schools and reduce those barriers. So we've got 2 sets of booklets, one aimed at pupils aged 7 to 11. This is a key age for inspiring young people in the topic and preventing misconceptions about science only being for certain types of people. Second set is for students aged 11 to 16. This is a time when many young people get turned off science just when they're making decisions about what they will choose to study and do in their futures. There's also a detailed leader booklet. This is a really key to overcoming the barrier of lack of competent staff. The leader booklet has been written for non-specialists. In it, we've put in all the subject knowledge and facilitation information needed so that a club session could be run by a teaching assistant, a parent, or even an older student. So in this project, we want to assess how well we've already helped schools overcome these barriers, better understand any additional barriers, and then improve the resources so that they can be sent out to similar schools in the future as an independent standalone resource without our additional support needed. In terms of targeting areas of the UK, we set out to reach schools who weren't already engaging with the NSO and that were in socially economically deprived areas of the UK. We started off focusing our efforts just on the nation of England and used government data on deprivation that was last published in 2019. We ended up deciding on 2 areas, Knowsley in the northwest of England and Middlesbrough in the northeast of England. In terms of the proportion of children living in income-deprived households, Knowsley has the 3rd highest percentage in England, and Middlesbrough is the 1st highest percentage. Both areas also have higher than average populations of working-age adults with no educational qualifications. Also in Knowsley, there is no A-level provision in the local authority. A-levels are a qualification that students sit age 18 in England, and it's the main qualification that leads to university. These are the areas we're currently working with. Building relationships with schools in those areas and getting sign-on to engage with our project, it's often challenging to engage schools. We didn't have much staff time funded through the project, so we reached out to our networks to find contacts in those areas with local knowledge who could advise us which schools were in need of the resources and which schools would be able to engage with our project. And this has worked really well in Middlesbrough. We've made some really great networks there. Knowsley in the northwest of England is actually next door to where we are, next door to Liverpool. And even though it's our next door neighbour, it's surprisingly harder to engage with, but it's been really good to learn this, and increasing engagement with schools in Knowsley is going to be a target we build into our future wider activities. In Knowsley, we have been able to connect teachers at a local level in different schools, and they're going to use our clubs to support pupils in the transition from primary to secondary schools, which takes place in England when they're around 11 years old. In Middlesbrough, schools that we're working with includes a school for children with severe learning difficulties, and they want their pupils to be able to join in with this project along with their partner schools. So they're going to adapt our materials for their pupils, because working with schools that specifically cater for children with special needs was outside the scope of this project, but it is part of our ongoing strategy. So we're really excited that this school wants to take on the additional project of adapting these resources. I'm really looking forward to what comes out of it and what we learn from them. So it's a real bonus for this project so far. So the project started in October 2020, so during COVID-19 pandemic, we began reaching out to schools around November 2020. Since October 2020, England has had 2 national lockdowns. During the first one, schools stayed open. During the second one, they closed, but they had to provide education to all pupils throughout. So we've been really surprised and pleased with how keen the schools have been to start their STEM clubs despite these changing circumstances. There's a real desire to offer new opportunities for the students and work around the difficult circumstances. The schools in England still can't have visitors, so we've been using Zoom, and perhaps in some cases it's made it easier for teachers to meet with us and connect with us. People have got used to having virtual meetings, and it's easier to facilitate a short training session than get schools to book their staff off for a half day of training. So in some ways it's made it easier to connect. Schools are going to do their STEM clubs in single year group bubbles to carry on making sure they are safe. Sessions haven't been written for virtual clubs, so it's good that schools are able to get the children into school and use these clubs safely with them. And the schools are also going to be using the clubs to support their pupils sort of get back to normal. A couple of the schools in Middlesbrough are going to connect virtually via Zoom to offer their pupils chances to interact and share what they've been doing, which they haven't really been able to do over the last year. And one school is going to use the activities as part of a recovery curriculum to reintroduce pupils to science skills, teamwork and problem solving. And we hope to visit when we can. So going forward, we will continue to support schools in England, and we're going to start to expand the project into the other UK nations of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. We've learned that reaching out to networks for expert local advice has been invaluable for reducing staff time trying to connect with schools in those areas new to us. And in terms of working during a global crisis, schools have been responding to the pandemic with amazing flexibility and focusing on the opportunities that are there. At the NSO, we're really excited to see our activities promoting a love of STEM and raising aspirations get put into schools, and we'll continue to share what comes out of it with the outreach and public engagement community. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jenny. And unfortunately, we don't have Jenny with us, but we have her colleagues, Stacy and Andy. Welcome, Stacy and Andy. I know we have a couple of questions from the participants, and maybe I'll start with the easy one, and then we can go to the hard one. So one of the questions is about the impact on teachers and or parents. Are you trying also to have some impact on the parents and teachers, or is only focusing on the students?
So a large part of this is definitely around supporting the teachers. So especially in the UK, a lot of the schools in these really deprived areas also have teachers that aren't specialists in physics, aren't specialists necessarily in science when they're teaching at the younger levels. So there's a huge lack of confidence in the teachers. So a lot of what we've put together is around supporting the teachers as well. So they have a separate leader book. We've tried to put a lot of background information, a lot of things that students might ask them and things in those sessions. And we're training the teachers to run these. So it's about empowering them to run them rather than us going into these schools and running them ourselves. So yeah, certainly in terms of the teachers, we're putting a lot of support into that because that's where we see there's a legacy to this project. They need to feel confident enough to run it again in the future. In terms of the parents, a lot of what we're doing is trying to get them to share what they've done. So they have their own book that they can take home. They can put photos in it or draw images in it of the things that they've been doing. And the hope is that they'll share that with their families. And it's also a big part of our evaluation is trying to have give them the confidence through these activities to want to share what they've been doing, to want to have discussions with the family about what they're doing. So we are going to evaluate that as we go along as well.
And maybe a question about the booklets, because we have two questions. One of them is about the development of the booklet. If you, for example, co-created activities with the teachers or even with the students, and also the other question is, do you have different booklets to different areas? Because of course you are trying to focus on low socioeconomic areas, but do you have different content depending on the areas?
Do you want to do that, Andy?
Yeah, in terms of the, by the way, can you hear me because my microphone was
We can.
Good. In terms of the what's the first part? Okay, the development of the booklets. They're in their sort of third iteration at the moment. So we started off internally bouncing ideas around, coming up with ideas, looking at the kind of activities that we could offer. We then worked with schools to refine those, worked with teachers to get them into a better state, and that turned into a set of books that were then trialed in a number of schools, and now they're at the stage where they can go out to these areas where we're working with the non-specialist teachers, and so they have been not usually co-created with the students directly, but with the teachers who work with their students. So it's a sort of a two-stage process. In terms of focusing on these particular areas, we're hoping to learn from this what is the most effective way of working with these pupils. So we're expecting, and are already starting to get quite a lot of feedback from the teachers who are going to be delivering this, and they're telling us, this won't work with our pupils, do more of this, do less of that, and so on. And so this is still part of the development process. That will then be able to be rolled out to any school with a similar kind of group of pupils, with similar kind of social background and so on. And once we know that is successful, we can then roll that out to other areas and other groups and see what adjustments need to be made for them. But it's a multi-stage process, and at each stage, talk to the people who are actually delivering it, talk to the students, talk to the pupils, and then find out how we need to refine these booklets as they go along.
Thank you, Andy. And maybe the last question, and because we don't really have that much time, but there's a lot of interest, so I'll just encourage all the participants to contact you during the rest of the day through the platform. So Jennifer mentioned this idea of the science capital in certain communities, and two of the questions that we have here is that how can you measure that science capital in certain communities? Do you have any tips, any resources?
So yeah, we definitely point you to the work of King's College in London, who've done a lot of the work behind this Science Capital survey. We actually got a bunch of survey questions from them directly, which we've turned into a kind of a pre-assessment form that we're going to do with the students. And it's a lot about asking them, do you ever go to museums? Do you ever talk to your family about science? Do you know anyone who is in a science or a STEM kind of career? So we're going to be giving the students that before they start the workshops to kind of gauge their science capital level. But the work from London is really great, and they're very open with sharing their resources about that and their evaluation forms. So I'll try and pop a link in the Q&A afterwards.
Please do that. That would be great. I think I think a lot of the participants will appreciate. Stacey and Andy, thank you so much for joining, and also please send our regards to Jennifer for the great talk. And I think we are ready to move to our last talk. And our last talk is by Anahí Caldú Primo, about astronomy in the land of avocados. Let's play the video.
My name is Anahí Caldú, and I am very happy to be here. I would first like to thank the Scientific Organizing Committee for giving me the chance to present these two projects here. And I will share my screen so that you can see my presentation, which has for title, Astronomy in the Land of Avocados. So this is a map of Mexico, and this highlighted state here is Michoacán. To place you a bit in context, Michoacán is responsible for 45% of world's avocado production. So it's a lot. If you like avocados, it's a great place to be. One of the problems with this is that avocado plants are very good in hiding other types of plants, and Michoacán, unfortunately, has a lot of narco traffic. It is one of the 10 most dangerous states in Mexico, and it has around 4.5 million inhabitants. So why did these two projects happen here? Well, Morelia is the capital city of Michoacán. I show it here in white. And in Morelia, there's a campus of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. And in this campus, there's the Institute for Radio Astronomy and Astrophysics, IRIA. And I worked there in 2017, 2018, and that's where I carried out these projects. So the first project has to do with beginning with what is closest to us. So here again, you have a larger map of Morelia. The city center is where Morelia stands. And then here in the blue square, you can see where UNAM campus actually is. So it's in the outskirts of the city. And just across the street, this street, which is actually a small highway, there's a neighborhood, a very large neighborhood called Tenencia Morelos. So they are very close by, but it's like living in two different worlds. Here I show you a couple of pictures of UNAM, of the campus. You can see that below, there's even, in the picture below, you can even see there's an open air museum. And the campus is very green, very well taken care of. And across the street, we have Tenencia Morelos, which is a very poor neighborhood with a lot of delinquency. Most of its inhabitants don't have high school, work as farmers, or go to the United States to work and then send money back. So these are very contrasting realities that unfortunately is a common problem in Mexico, where we have a lot of inequalities. And an anecdote a friend told me once, I think, expresses very well which kind of tension these inequalities can raise. So on campus, some of us used to go running around campus after work. And one time, this colleague from astronomy was jogging, and he was jogging next to the fence that divides the university from the outside. And then a farmer was coming back from work carrying all his tools. And then he sees this guy running on this green paradise, and he yells at him like, "Get to work." So, I mean, it can sound funny, but it really shows that there's a lot of tension because of this inequality. And because of this, it's sometimes very hard to break the distance and have successful outreach activities. So actually, there's a lot of outreach activities happening on campus. Astronomy also, the Institute of Radio Astronomy and Astrophysics also holds a monthly conference in astronomy, but asking with surveys where the people come from, there was nobody coming from Tenencia Morelos to this series of conferences. So that didn't sound good to me, and that's why I proposed this first project in collaboration with other institutes. So the project is called UNAM in Your Neighborhood, and the institutes that were collaborating with it were the Center for Mathematics, the Institute of Research in Ecosystems and Sustainability, and the Center of Research in Environmental Geography. So the idea was to go to this neighborhood, Tenencia Morelos, which has different plazas. Actually, it's a large tenencia, a large neighborhood. And the idea was to, every 2 months, go to a different plaza and hold their outreach activities. Talking to the people there and asking why they don't come to university, they told us that one of the reasons is because they didn't know it was open for everybody, because they see fences and everything, so they think it's a closed space. So talking to them, it's easier to tell them, like, no, I mean, you're actually invited to come. But also a problem is the distance. Even though it's only 2 kilometers away, walking this distance for young people or for children, it's sometimes impossible, and more if you hold activities at night, which is usually what we astronomers do, to be able to also have observations with a telescope. So bringing the activities to the plazas help to start this communication, to see what the problems are, and well, to know how to do diffusion of the events, because one would think nowadays that social media are the way to go, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok now. But talking to the people and talking to the authorities of this neighborhood, we realized that we were incorrect. And they told us that the best way to let people know there that something is going on is to print posters and put them on the local meat shop, for example. And another interesting way of passing information is with a megaphone. So the authorities have this car with a megaphone, and when there's some important information, they drive around and they pass this information. So we did it like that, and it was very successful. I will, in the next couple of slides, show you some of the pictures. Unfortunately, we didn't think about hiring a professional photographer to take some pictures, so some of them are not very high quality, but they will give you an idea. So for example, here in ecology, with very rudimentary tools, cinema was built on the basketball court, but it was still good to be able to show films on ecology. Math was a real success with this papyroflexy workshop, in which lots of people attended, and this type of activity also gives a very good opportunity to talk to the publics and understand what they are interested in, and getting information on the neighborhood. Geography, so you can also see there's different ages attending these activities, from this very old man to these very young children, and the activities are intended to be also fun, so that children are more interested in taking part. And finally, astronomy, which is what matters to us the most. As I told you before, it's very hard for them to come at night to the university, so we brought the telescopes to the neighborhood, we gave a public talk, and it was a real success. All these people doing the line had never seen through a telescope before, so there was a lot of excitement, and it was a very happy day, and I think we all were very happy with the result. And well, to measure a bit the success of these activities, I would like to share with you that on the next conferences on campus of the Astronomy Institute and doing the surveys, the families from Tenencia Morelos started coming. So for me, that was already a success. Like, we broke this inertia of being two separate communities. And the second project I would like to tell you about, I did in collaboration with Bernardo Cervantes Sodi, also an astronomer, and Mercedes Martinez and Claudia Escalera, who are professors at the university there, UNAM in Morelia, on the social sciences. So this project was a mixture between social sciences and astronomy, and I will tell you why. So first, it was called knowledge exchange, and it was more ambitious in the sense that we wanted to get outside of the city, to go to these communities like Santa Fe de la Laguna, these towns, and Cuanajo, which are about 40 kilometers away from Morelia. So it's not a great distance, but if you think of public outreach and people attending, it's already a very large distance to cover, and more when there's no real good public transportation and there's the security issues. So the activities consisted on 3 parts. The first one was an outreach activity of astronomy. So there were also public talks given in the plazas of these towns. So you can see also here, there was a very good attendance and with various ages, and it was very, very nice. And also observations with a telescope. Again, I mean, in these small towns, a telescope is something like science fiction. So apart from the outreach activity, we also prepared some kits with material to be able to show some of the aspects of astronomy. And there were workshops held for teachers so that they could learn how to use these kits and then be able to show astronomical aspects constantly in the classroom. So that it would not only be an outreach activity and then we go away and maybe we come back a year later or never come back. So they keep these kits and they keep the contact with us. So in case they need anything, they can always send us an email or call us and then we can help them. And finally, the last part of this project, which I find the most revolutionizing, is this mixture with social sciences. So the people from social sciences had meetings with the people from the community so that they could talk about the problems the community has and then see if some of the areas in the university could help solve in collaboration with the community these problems. So for example, in the university there's this environmental geography and ecosystems and sustainability. So they can help with maybe giving advice on how to do some crop mixture so that the land works better, etc. And that was very interesting, very nice. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit afterwards, so in this moment it has not been easy to continue working, but that's the idea. So this very briefly shows the idea of this last project, which is that through knowledge exchange in two directions, we can maybe solve community problems, we can do some science outreach, and teacher workshops. So finally, I would like to share with you my take-home messages. The first one is that we need to know our publics, even to know how to make diffusion of the events we want to have so that we reach the people we want these events to go. Then it's essential to have a two-way communication. We need to learn from each other. Everybody plays an important role in society, and it's very important that we go on the outreach activities knowing this and not only trying to teach. We have to learn also from our publics. And finally, I think it's also super important to have continuity, and not only have activities that take place once per year and then forget about it until next year. We should implement mechanisms to be able to be there more often. And well, with this I finish. Thank you very much, and I'm open for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Anahí, for the talk and for the recording. And we have Anahí here with us today. I hope that you can hear me well. Okay, perfect. So there's one question here from Cynthia. She's asking how long these two projects last. We can't hear you. Okay. Let's just wait 1 or 2 seconds to see if Anahí can rejoin. If not, I think we have to. Also, we're running a bit late, 7 minutes late. So I guess we can just, close the session. Oh no, Anahí is here. So let's see. Is it working now? Unfortunately not. No, I hope that it's not only for me, but I don't think so.
Yeah,
okay.
No sound from Anahí.
No, okay. So Anahí, it's really not working. So I think we can't hear you. Okay, sorry, we cannot hear you, Anahí. Maybe someone can send her an email. In any case, I think we have to gonna close this session, and please contact Anahí during the rest of the event, especially today. I'm sure she's going to be around. You can message her and ask a question. There was some questions for her at the Q&A, please do. And it's time for a break. We're going to have 22-minute break. So please, you can take a rest, but also you can join some of the networking opportunities. The platform provides a networking opportunity that you can join, like Ram was presenting at the beginning, and you can randomly talk with one of the participants for 3 minutes, and then you're going to get to know a bit all the community. Another possibility is also to check the e-posters. There's another section on the left-hand side menu where you can check the different posters that we have for the conference, and it's a great way to also to see what our community is doing all around the world. Then at 3:30 UTC, you can join the parallel sessions. Check the program, and then you can join one of the parallel sessions. Also, you can find them on the left-hand side menu, and there you can go for the different parallel sessions. So let's close now the plenary session. I'd like to thank all the speakers, including our Kavli keynote speaker, John Besley, and all the other plenary talk speakers. We had an interesting program, and I think we're really setting the bar quite high for the quality that we expect for the rest of the week. Once again, thank you for joining this camp, and I'll see you around during your talks and during some of the parallel sessions. Bye-bye.